Hey, welcome back to part 2 of this video of how I built a giant miniature bat cave. If you missed part 1, please go back and watch it. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about the entrance for the bat vehicles and how I went about starting the bat cave and the basics of the bat computer, as well as some of the other industrial features. The entrance for the bat vehicles to get into the bat cave was something that I had in my mind from the beginning of the diorama. I wanted to incorporate some sort of Art Deco and Gothic design feels because that vibes really well with the big guy here. So I came up with sort of a cathedral door style entrance, and I also wanted to incorporate some really beautiful Art Deco shapes. I knew I had to use a material that was very flexible and heat formable. This white material is 1/8 inch or 0.125 expanded foam board. You could also do it with PVC board, and that expanded foam board and PVC board, mostly the same material that you would see in PVC pipe. This stuff, it's easy to cut, it's easy to glue, it's easy to mold, and you can heat form it with a heat gun or even a hot blow dryer if you have one. So I created a template in the shape and size and height that I wanted, and I kind of worked backwards from there, cutting the pieces, shaping them. Really, there's nothing to it other than cutting, shaping, and gluing. When you have an idea like this, it's good to start with a template and build out from there. So that's usually how I do it. There was a lot of waiting for things to dry when I did this. This piece took me several hours a week for several weeks until I got it where I wanted. After I did that, the backing where the actual doors were going to be is made of 1/4 inch foam board or project foam board. It's a good base to start with if you're doing a complex linear shape. I wanted my door to not just be a flat piece or 2 flat pieces. I was thinking it might open up outward towards the outside, kind of like a clamshell, but in 4 pieces, kind of like that. If Batman needed to get into the cave and the doors could shut, they kind of act like a blast door. So if anything were trying to get in, it would be nearly impossible. So that was the idea I had for the shape of the door. That additional piece facing backwards away from the door, that was a hollow cavity I created because I thought it would be really pretty to accent the shape of this piece by putting a light in there. So that space was just so I could add some light and reflect it. I ended up painting the inside of that with reflective paint. These are made of the same material I used to detail the bat computer platform. They're made of styrene. I made a lot of paper templates for these shapes. I traced that paper template onto the styrene. I cut it out, trimmed it, glued it, and kept adding detail. You can see here my first paint test. I wasn't really sure at this point what color I wanted it to be, so I just did like a rust layer and some sanding just to see what things would look like. I added a little detail to the top, like a little cornice piece, because I wanted to be able to hide the light behind it so that it looked like it was bursting or glowing up into that cathedral peak. I also made it out of cardstock. That is pink and yellow cardstock scrap that I had sitting around my shop. I wanted it to look like a sunburst. And you'll see also with the light behind it, it also evoked a little bit of the shape of a bat or bat wings and the head of a bat, kind of sticking with that Gothic Batman theme. That's kind of where my brain led me to this. I ended up deciding on a very Art Deco color, which is sort of that patinaed copper color, or in this case, this beautiful turquoise, this beautiful sort of turquoise teal green. And that's also what I ended up coloring all the other main metal pieces. The accent piece here, I ended up painting gold. And then I did the rust layer on the cathedral base because if I ever wanted to remove paint, the rust would show through underneath. So sometimes on these, especially in a wet diorama that I'm imagining is going to be in a wet environment, I'll do a rust layer even if I never end up sanding through. You can see the sides of the doors have poles on them. That's actual brass tubing that I had lying around. In my mind, I was imagining those maybe as locking mechanisms or some type of hinge for those doors to open outward. And here you can see me starting to add some of the larger Gothic cathedral and train tunnel inspired elements that I talked about in my first video. I made those huge industrial beams, and they were meant to evoke the same arc shape that's going on with the cathedral bat vehicle entrance. This was a complex process because they had to decide left to right where they were going to go on the diorama, which means I had to cut them off at different heights. So there was a lot of measuring to make sure I got that lower section the correct height for where it was going to be placed relative to the different objects in the diorama. Just shaping, gluing, and cutting those took me almost an entire day to get them properly sized and fitting where I wanted them to go. Trying to decide if I wanted them to stick straight out or at an angle. I ended up going with an angle later, and there were some different challenges with that, which you'll probably see in the third video I do. I went back to building some more of the platforms and stairwells that interconnected. And again, just this little stair piece took me a long time because I had to decide where I wanted the next platform it was leading up to end up, which was actually going to be on the right side of the diorama, which was very, very important because this diorama splits into two pieces. The top of that stairwell had to intersect the other side of the diorama perfectly, otherwise things were going to break and not line up. So just making this little piece took me hours of measuring and figuring out the relative difference between the top of the platform next to it and the top of the back computer platform, so I could measure the left to right, how many risers and treads I needed on the steps, which is a complex process because if you want it to look real, you need the tread to be a standard tread depth and you need the riser to be a standard riser depth. So there's a lot of math involved. If you want to look that up, you can search tread and riser standards for your country or region. I don't try to get them exact, I try to get them close so that when your eye looks at it, it looks realistic. If you just do the same size tread and step, a lot of times it's not going to look real. Most risers are about 6 to 7 inches and most treads are about 10 to 14 inches. So I use those dimensions when I work backwards, going from one platform to the next with any stairwell to make sure that they look realistic and they'll also be proportionate to the figure. This diorama is built in 1/12 scale, meaning it's for 6 or 7 inch tall action figures. Most of the action figures that you buy at the store are going to be about that size. 1/12 scale is great to work in if you live in America because our standard foot dimension is divided up into 12 inches. So you know if you want to make something 1 foot wide, it is going to be 1 inch wide because 12 of those makes a foot. So 1 in 12 gives you 1 inch per foot, which is a great scale to work in because it's easy to calculate real life dimensions on a smaller scale. The actual grating is made out of a metal mesh that you can buy. It's a decorative mesh that usually comes in a big like 1x2 sheet, but you can actually trim this down with scissors and it super glues really well as long as you let that super glue set up. I was really, really happy with the way they came out once I started adding the color shading. I realized how big the diorama was when I had to get on a ladder to actually work on things. So that's just me kind of expressing myself that day. The back computer is in and of itself took a long time to plan and figure out how to do not only the size, shape, and scale, but incorporate lighting into it. I did have some help from the Gotham Construction Co. team. They threw a couple of pointers my way. They were some things I was already thinking about, but they confirmed my suspicions on things that would help me get the lighting distributed within these big panels. What you see there, I made the desks out of some pre-molded styrene. You can create the shape if you were to create like a wooden mold and then heat it up and bend it and let it cool down. You could create shapes like this. This is how I made those desks. And the detailing with layering up of different types of poster boards, styrene, and foam board. These screens are frames that I made out of foam board, styrene, different types of plastic. And then I made the faces the same way. The faces, the frames of the faces could actually come off because I needed to get in there to add the lighting and also to put in the screens once I had them made. You can see in this picture I actually used the 12-volt strip LEDs, and what I did for the smaller screens was I made a rear channel that would run the length of the screens that I could put one strip of LEDs into to light up both screens instead of trying to cut separate little LED sections and wire all those. It's already too much work, but that would have created even more work. The main screen is an LED strip going all the way around the inside that would glow towards the center, not forward because you would see bright lights coming through, but towards the center, and then all of these boxes got lined with aluminum tape. This is aluminum tape. It's extremely shiny. You can find it at pretty much any home store. It's shiny because it's meant to cover seams on HVAC material and different types of sheet metal. It actually is made of aluminum. You can cut it to any shape you need. The way your headlights on your car work, there's a reflective material to bounce that light around and make it brighter. That's exactly what I did to light up these screens. These screens I built in Photoshop whenever I was home and I had a few minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. I would sit down and start pulling in images and ideas of things I wanted that I thought would look really cool that Batman might be working on his computer. So you can see little pieces of evidence here, ways that he can access criminal files and the Gotham City Police Department's information, as well as I have a Star City Police report there about a vigilante being the Green Arrow. I made that graphic myself using the image of the Sideshow Collectibles Green Arrow statue, confidential report on Dr. Pavel from The Dark Knight Rises, as well as some of the newspaper clippings from the Nolan films. And I thought it would be cool to make something about how they made it look like Batman was researching how to make kryptonite or weaponized kryptonite to be able to fight Superman. So I looked up some different gemstones and chemical refraction indexes and mineral composition charts, and I made that little piece there. It would just be a little Easter egg for the commissioner once he got this piece. This is a 12-volt system, so I had this 12-volt battery wand lying around that I would regularly connect and disconnect to my wires to make sure I hadn't cut anything or messed anything up in the process. Every time I would make a change to something physically or move something, I would test, because I was paranoid about gluing everything together and none of the lighting working, which it was good that I was paranoid, because there were many times I had to go back and make adjustments. You'll find that you'll have to do that too when you start doing this complex lighting work. I finally started doing my texture ideas and painting the rock to make sure it was going to look the way I wanted. And I did this just on the left side of the diorama to begin with, to make sure I didn't dedicate all of this work to the whole diorama and end up having to change it later. So that's gonna do it for part 2 of how I made this giant miniature bat cave. Come back for part 3 and we'll start going over the rock, the texture, and how we started incorporating all these big pieces together to make them look like one giant bat cave. Please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, and you'll know exactly when that next video comes up. And please batarang that like button all the way back to the Fortress of Solitude. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.